Greetings and welcome to another edition of AUHSD Future Talks. I'm your host, Michael Matsuda, Superintendent of the Anaheim Union High School District. And as our 7,000 plus podcasters know, this show is really dedicated to the future of education for America's youth, the next generation of this country. Today we're very lucky to have some very special guests in a district to university partnership. University is USC, and the program's called Candle. And the lead professor is Mary Helen Imordino Yang. And today we have two of amazing doctors of education that are going to help unwind this partnership. Christina Kundrak and Emily Gonzalez, as well as our own Dinah Fujimoto and Michael Switzer. Welcome to the show, all four of you. And we're going to start right off, Christina and Emily, with the nature of the partnership. What do you guys do, and why is this partnership so important?
Thank you for having us. Emily and I work, as you mentioned, at the USC Center for Affective Neuroscience, Development, Learning, and Education. And so at our center, we really bring together developmental psychology with educational neuroscience, affective neuroscience, and the field of education research. And so we partner with districts like Anaheim Union High School District, as well as other schools in California and across the country, to really investigate what does adolescent development look like, and how can our schools and systems support this healthy, beneficial brain growth, mind growth for these psychosocial outcomes that we really want over time. We want our society to build learners who are feeling purposeful, democratic citizens. And this partnership that we have with you all has been really excellent as we've been able to investigate this from several different angles to understand how are students finding their voice and purpose in school spaces, as well as outside.
And I will just jump in to echo some of the things that Christina said. We've been really fortunate to work with Anaheim in multiple ways, but we're really fortunate to be able to work with some of the teachers this year, because we know that Anaheim is doing amazingly innovative work to support students in their development and offering them really meaningful and rich opportunities to learn and to develop into self-actualizing young adults. And so this is all through your focus on important instructional drivers, such as the 5 C's and voice and purpose and technical skills. And we see these as opportunities for students to develop their capacities to engage in transcendent thinking. And so we have had the amazing opportunity to partner to understand how teachers are starting to develop the contexts to support students in their transcendent thinking and ultimately their development into young adults.
So you mentioned a key phrase that we're all adopting, transcendent thinking. Christina, Emily, could you remind us what that means?
Absolutely. So transcendent thinking is something that we use at Candle to describe when people are thinking in ways that are connecting a lot of ideas, creatively inventing new ideas, and seeing beyond sort of the immediate context and what is super obvious to us here in the moment, to grasp deeper truths and meanings that go beyond. So this is something, as humans, we are constantly interpreting the world around us and making sense of what we see and what we hear. But the ways in which we do that can be sometimes quite superficial or in the moment, which is important and vital for us as well. But we want our students to also be able to think more deeply about how the things that they're learning are connecting to the broader world, because this can lead to them coming up with innovative solutions to problems, new perspectives on life, a more profound understanding of some of these more complex concepts, and ultimately builds their sense of agency.
And I'll just build on that by saying, first and foremost, this is a human capacity, right? And it's a meaning-making process. And I want to emphasize that word process there, because it isn't simply an outcome, right? It's a deeply social, emotional, and cognitive process that we can support students in as educators. And so For example, we're not going to learn the scientific equation for photosynthesis because the equation itself holds value to our life, although it might. But we learn about photosynthesis because it helps us understand processes that we, depend on but cannot see with the human eye. And hopefully that gives us an appreciation for the complexity and interconnectedness of our world. And hopefully that ignites, interests in conservation and environmental activism. So I'm also wanting to emphasize this idea of agency here too, that transcendent thinking can really encourage this sense of agency and purpose in youth.
Diana Fujimoto, you're in charge of our professional learning, and Christina and Emily just gave us a master class on transcendent thinking. How does that translate to our adult learners, our teachers, when the science teacher might say, yes, I'm teaching science, but now you want me to teach transcendent thinking? And go ahead. I'll start with Diana, but I'm going to ask him what he thinks about that. Go ahead.
So I think what is very exciting about this partnership is that the research that will come from the work that both Emily and Christina are conducting with our current teachers that are part of this research cohort is that we can leverage that information about how teachers' dispositions and how they're creating the context to support students' development of the 5 C's and student voice. And it's just very validating and affirming with the work that we are currently doing. We want to understand what the behaviors and the practices are of the classroom space, so that we can support all of our teachers in designing meaningful learning experiences that allow all of our students to engage in this type of transcendent thinking and learning, this meaning making in the classroom. So this partnership is very exciting. We are, looking forward to building our professional learning that includes opportunities for teachers to engage in this work so that they can support students across the district.
But Mike, you're on the ground. With teachers, how do they respond to that? Where do you teach transcendent thinking in your performance assessment? Where does that come in, and how do you know that it's sticking?
Well, I think there are a couple different entry points to several different entry points really for transcendent thinking to happen in our district. So, I think our partnership with Kendall and Emily and Christina, the timing is just perfect in AUHSD. 4 or 5 years ago, we really locked on to the career preparedness systems framework and the 3 drivers in there to really frame our vision in AUHSD. So that would be the 5 C's, it would be technical skills, and then student voice and purpose. And so to make that vision real, we adopted a capstone program in the district. So all of our schools have rolled out capstone programs the last couple of years. And at the heart and soul of that is our performance task assessment system, right? Which is really, it's our promise to kids to give them meaningful, relevant, engaging, thoughtful, just really vital learning experiences throughout their time in AUHSD. So, as we've worked with teachers in the last couple of years to develop those performance task assessments, there are lots of entry points in there for kids to think transcendently, right? And have those experiences where they can really find meaning, find purpose. And also a huge part of our capstone program is really the reflective process. And I think we're really proud of our teachers in AUHSD for really committing to pausing after a learning experience, pausing after a performance task assessment is finished, and giving kids opportunities to really reflect on their learning, to make sense of it, to make meaning of it, and say, this is why it's important. This is how it's valuable. This is how I'm going to use it in the future. This is how I use it in other classes. And that type of thinking can leads to transcendent learning, transcendent thinking, which has ripple effects really all over the curriculum, all over the school, all over the district.
So you had mentioned this, the pause. and reflection, Diana, is that something that's graded, or is that something that's just teachers are adding after the fact of their teaching their lesson?
Yeah, so I think we have really encouraged teachers as they are creating, their PTAs, that they are providing opportunities for students to reflect throughout the entire process. And in addition to that, though, I feel like teachers, you go into teaching because you want to make an impact. You want to have a positive impact on the lives of students. And you want students to graduate, to leave your classroom with purpose, right? And so that's why I think this, the transcendent meaning making, the transcendent thinking and learning goes beyond just learning the content, but as a teacher, when you are able to provide a purpose for your students, and when the students recognize why they are learning these things and why and what impact they can make beyond the classroom, I mean, that's huge, right? And I think that also will fuel the teacher to just keep going, right? And just reignite the passion they have for teaching and working with our young students.
So I'm going to ask one more time, is this, are the teachers assigning this for a grade, or is this something the students are doing on their own with prompting?
I don't think it is it is graded, right? Because this is part of the process of learning, the process of, finding, understanding, reflecting on your learning, finding your purpose. It's not, I would say that it's not something that is part of a grade per se, but definitely part of the learning process and growing.
So Christina, it's really about instilling habits of mind, right, for young people. How do you respond to those people? And I would say a lot of folks out there in the K-12 education world are probably not ready for this, are resistant to it because they're focused on learning loss and reading and math test scores. How do you respond to that?
That's such a huge, important question. And I think I'll start with building off some of the ideas that Mike brought up with this reflective process. What we see in the brain science actually supports this idea of the value of having a reflective process on top of some of the more traditional learning activities that happen in the classroom. What we see in the brain is that the networks that are responsible for focusing our kind of outward attention, the executive functioning that we hear so much about, those same brain networks are do not naturally kind of co-activate with the networks, the default mode network, which is the ones that's really activated when we're doing internal reflection and thinking deeply about how these things connect and what do they mean for us as an individual. And so we see that these brain networks are coordinated and work together, but they really do not naturally kind of co-activate. And so if we're not creating intentional spaces, our classroom activities can kind of sometimes skew to be really focused on just creating those outputs and focusing on things like just creating the grade, making up learning loss, focusing on really lots of specific outcomes, which are important. However, when we shift the focus as educators to the process of learning, that then allows for space both conceptually as well as temporally, actually making the time to allow students to kind of disengage from the immediate tasks that they're working on, to take a step back and say, okay, I've been thinking about photosynthesis, and now I have this chemical equation. It's not just about memorizing that chemical equation, but how is this connecting to some things that I care about, like conservation, as Emily mentioned. And so I think that the argument that I would make for people who are pushing back on some of these kind of ideas is what are we hoping that our students will be taking away from school? If we are wanting them to think in ways that are coming up with solutions for their community, finding roles and careers that they find purpose in and that are contributing to society as a whole, we need to allow for there to be spaces where they can connect and think about those things, as well as thinking in ways that are not just siloed by disciplines, thinking across what they're learning in math class, English class, history class, and seeing how all of those things connect. So I think that learning loss is something like a symptom that if we focus on some of these other outcomes, it will be alleviated. But that's really scary to do, and it takes it's a risk to take, but I think that the benefits far outweigh the potential downside when we're thinking about the future of our kids.
You know, Emily, when Christina talks about purpose, are we talking about intrinsic motivation?
That's a great question. And I think that purpose and intrinsic motivation, they may be, partially related to each other, right? You have to be interested in something in order to be motivated to pursue it. And you may find that you build purpose from exploring that particular topic that you find particularly motivating. But I think that there's something about purpose that is deeply human. It's deeply subjective. It's deeply emotional and social. When we're building meaning about ourselves, we are creating purpose. We're seeing where we play out in the grand scheme of things, how we want to contribute to society, who we are as a mathematician, as a scientist, as a historian. And we're trying to understand who we are in all of these different spaces and how we can contribute to society in meaningful ways. And I think that is really a differentiating factor between, purpose, which is deeply related to the self, deeply related to some of the things that Christina was talking about regarding reflection and the brain networks that are involved in it. And intrinsic motivation can certainly be part of it. I think it's a little piece of it because, of course, we're intrinsically motivated to explore the things that we care about. And hopefully that develops into a broader sense of self and purpose in the long run.
It's such a complex challenge for educators to try, because we are dealing with a situation that is called learning loss, right? And I don't like that term. I think many of us do not like that term, but that's what probably 99% of people refer to this whole post-pandemic world in education. And I had this conversation. I was trying to get them to understand this transcendent thinking around purpose and meaning and intrinsic motivation to learn, right? Because I think right now there's real frustration that kids are turning off to school, they're turning off to learning or wanting to learn. So if we're to scale the work that we are doing collectively with Candle, how do we find the language to do that so we can get more of our colleagues to buy into this important work that's going on? And Christina, you want to take a stab at that one?
Absolutely. I think that it's not just coming up with the language, it really is a mindset shift. And the language can help facilitate that, but it really is going to take moving from thinking about particular outcomes to thinking about how do we support students developmentally? Because a lot of the reasons why we might see some of this students checking out, loss of motivation, is because they're not finding a connection with school in many ways. And so as a system, as an educational system, we need to be responsive to what these kids are needing right now coming out of this post-pandemic climate, as well as what our future evolving world is our modern world is asking them to do. And when we're responsive to that, we can then shape and change the kinds of educational opportunities, and whether that looks like introducing things like internships, community wraparound schools, all of these kinds of approaches are getting at the idea that we need to support the whole person, the whole child, not just whether or not they have certain XYZ math skills or XY, like writing, reading, arithmetic, right? It's like those things, those essential skills are incredibly important. But we need to have a mindset shift to move towards thinking about what does this next generation of students really need to be successful contributing members of our society, and being willing to adjust our schooling environments to adapt to that.
Mike, I want to turn to you again, working on the front lines with teachers, trying to get teachers to understand and embrace transcendent thinking. Do you think that in order for us to teach kids, we need adults to practice that themselves, right? It's about being intentional about this bringing in this reflective piece to all the learning that goes on in the adult mind.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely, Mike. When we have our vision for the AUHSD community, it's not really just our vision for kids, right? It's our vision for everybody. It's our vision for our teachers, our administrators, the ed division. I mean, we want everybody to find a voice and find purpose and have all the skills you need to be successful in the world. So, yeah, absolutely.
Diana, do you have, we're trying to scale this internally with our 1,200 teachers. What has been the most challenging part about that, about getting teachers to see their roles in transcendent thinking for kids?
Quite honestly, I feel since we started talking about transcendent thinking, there's been a buzz around it and teachers eager to learn more about it. And so I think as we move forward and, just really bring to light what is transcendent thinking and learning, how do you set up the conditions in the classroom to support students in that work? I honestly don't feel there will be much resistance. We have in AUHSD are very fortunate that we have a set up conditions for our teachers to be creative, to think outside the box. And like I said earlier, I think, as an educator, you go in wanting to make a difference in a young person's life, to help them find purpose. This is aligned right to it. And I think if anything, knowing what the professional learning from the research, the findings, what that's going to help is validate again the work that we have been engaged in, and really just kind of catapult and just we'll be able to leverage all of that and really just again kind of run with it. I think it's going to be exciting. I'm excited to work with the teachers. I don't anticipate much resistance because this is really in line with the work that I think is at the heart of every teacher.
So,
Mike, can I add something to what Diana said? I think a big chunk of it is just teachers need to give themselves permission to pause. Instead of going from one unit to another unit to another unit, they need to give themselves permission to pause, step back for a minute, really look back on what the kids have learned, how they're, the effectiveness of their teaching, and really give kids that opportunity to reflect there. And if it is something we value, transcendent thinking, reflection, the 5 C's, everything that's really embedded within our vision, our administrators, any leadership team needs to have the courage to put that at the forefront, and tell the teachers, pause, let's think about it, let's reflect on it, and let's make some meaning from it.
But isn't that part of the problem with the pedagogy the way it is, that there's no time to pause? In fact, if I pause, my kid gets further behind in learning loss.
There's time if we prioritize it, Mike.
Yeah, well, that's the big challenge, right? I mean, especially, I'm thinking about how do you scale beyond what we're doing. I think that's the big challenge. Christina and Emily, you're both familiar with our drivers and our 5 C's. What is the relationship between the 5 C's and transcendent thinking, in your opinion?
I think that the connection between the 5 C's and transcendent thinking is a really clear pathway. For example, if we're just going to take the 5 C's, if students who are thinking critically, they're thinking creatively, communicating with authentic audiences, collaborating with peers as well as adults and other people outside of the immediate school community, and acting in ways that are compassionate, they will be then able to connect these ideas across different spaces, right? They're the ones who are innovating new ideas and thinking about solutions to the problems that they're seeing in their community. So there really is a super clear connection with students who are thinking and learning to behave in these certain ways, then changing the sort of disposition of mind that they're bringing to the work in their academic areas. And I would argue that is also true for teachers. To the points that Diana and Mike were making, and connecting it to some of the research that we've seen at Kindle, working with teachers in other schools and other districts, as the teachers who are thinking about their students in these more developmental ways, which we would say is a form of transcendent thinking for the teachers, right? They're thinking about their student beyond just the context of history class, and thinking about their student in the context of the world more broadly and as a human. The teachers who are thinking in these more sort of developmentally oriented ways are the teachers whose practices are more supportive of student learning ultimately. And even though they're and we kind of see this as a developmental trajectory for teachers. So how can we, getting to your point of how do we do this at scale, there are ways that we can think about introducing things into teacher preparation programs, ongoing professional developments, in which to support teachers in moving their thinking along this sort of developmental trajectory to support their students in that way, that are aligned with these instructional drivers that you have at the district.
And I'll just build on that. I think Christina described that beautifully, that we partnered with AUHSD because of your explicit, for many things, but because also of this explicit focus on these key instructional drivers, one of which is this focus on the 5 C's. And we said, aha, here's an example of a district that's really focusing on the capacities that we, our science and from Candle shows can be part of precursors or components of transcendent thinking, which we show can lead to a multitude of beneficial developmental and psychosocial outcomes. And so, you're really focusing on the right capacities here. And we think that, your focus on those capacities are what is allowing students to develop their abilities to think transcendently and develop themselves over time.
Okay, so this is the last question here, and we'll kick it off with Diana. For a listener who's also in charge of professional learning for an outside district and wanted to contact you, and it's transcendent thinking, I'm impressed. Where do I begin? Diana, where do I begin?
So in terms of starting professional learning, well, we started small, right? So we were fortunate to connect with Emily and Christina and Candle. And we have our summer colloquium where we supported our teachers in the development of performance task assessments. And we introduced the idea of transcendent thinking in that cohort of about over the course of the 2 sessions, about 70 or so teachers. So I think starting small and working with a coalition of willing teachers who want to go deeper, maybe with transcendent meaning making, and then again, working with them and identifying, what is it that they are doing in their classrooms to set up the classroom that allows for students to engage in this type of meaning making, right? So starting with the coalition of the willing, starting small, and then, determining then how are you going to set up your professional learning that allows for more teachers to understand what transcendent thinking and learning is, right? And then going from there.
Okay, well, I hope we ignited some interest out there, and we look forward to bringing you guys back and working with you on on this big plan of scaling. So thank you again, Christina and Emily and Diana and Mike Switzer. Thank you so much.